Hello there, my peaceful wanderer, and welcome to this twilight journey into the mystical, ancient lands of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. These are places where stone speaks and water remembers. Here, beneath grey skies and across emerald hills, the old stories refuse to die. They linger in the mist that rises from the valleys, in the shadows cast by standing stones, and in the whispered warnings passed from one generation to the next. These are not simply tales to amuse children by the fireside. They are the collected wisdom of countless lives, a roadmap to the unseen world that exists alongside our own. Tonight we step across that threshold. We seek out the guardians of sacred places, the shapeshifters who walk between forms, and the ancient powers that once ruled these islands. Come with me now into the half-light, where the veil grows thin and the old gods are watching. Our journey begins not with a whisper, but with the roar of winter itself. Across the Scottish Highlands and the western shores of Ireland, when the first bitter winds sweep down from the mountains and the world begins its descent into darkness, the people knew that she had awakened. They called her the Cailleach, and she was far more than a mere spirit of winter. She was winter incarnate, a divine being of such age and power that the mountains themselves were said to be her handiwork. Her name carries weight. In Scottish Gaelic, Cailleach means the veiled one, or old woman, but these simple words barely capture her immensity. She is described as a giantess, her skin the blue-grey of storm clouds or ancient stone, her single eye blazing with cold fury. In one hand she carries a staff of blackthorn or holly, and with each strike of this staff against the earth, the ground freezes solid and snow begins to fall. She is not cruel for cruelty's sake, but she is relentless, implacable, a force as inevitable as the turning of the seasons themselves. The landscape bears her fingerprints everywhere. Mountains throughout Scotland and Ireland are said to be stones that fell from her apron as she strode across the land, building the terrain itself. Loch after loch is attributed to her creative fury. She would drop boulders to form islands, carve valleys with her staff, and shape the very bones of the earth. The Ben Nevis Massif, the Paps of Jura with their distinctive breast-like peaks, the Hag's Chair overlooking Loch Derg, all are monuments to her elemental power. But the Cailleach is not simply a destroyer. She is a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, a holder of balance. In many traditions, she is locked in an eternal transformation with Brigid, the radiant goddess of spring, poetry, and fertility. As winter fades and the first warmth returns to the land, the ancient hag is said to drink from a sacred well on Imbolc, the first day of February. This act transforms her, restoring her youth and beauty, and she becomes Brigid herself, the bringer of light and life. When autumn comes again and the darkness returns, Brigid ages, withers, and once more becomes the Cailleach, closing the circle. This myth speaks to something profound about how the Celtic people understood time and nature. They did not see the seasons as separate phenomena, but as aspects of a single divine being, forever dying and being reborn. The harsh winter that could bring starvation and death was not an enemy to be cursed, but a necessary sleep, a time of rest before the world could bloom again. The Cailleach taught endurance, respect for the natural order, and the wisdom that all things, even the coldest darkness, must eventually give way to light. In the lonely glens where her presence is still felt, where the wind howls through ancient stones and snow lies deep on the high passes, the Cailleach remains. She is the first snow. She is the killing frost. She is the reminder that the land is older and more powerful than any who dwell upon it, and that we are all, in the end, subject to forces we can neither control nor comprehend. From the frozen heights of winter, we descend into the wild places of the countryside, where the lanes grow narrow and the hedgerows thick. Here, on certain nights when the moon is hidden and the shadows deepen, travellers speak of encounters with something that should not be. It appears without warning, shifts its shape without reason, and vanishes before you can be certain you truly saw it at all. This is the Púca, Ireland's most unpredictable and dangerous shapeshifter, a creature whose very nature is transformation and chaos. The Púca's most common form is that of a sleek black horse with eyes that burn like coals and a coat that seems to absorb the light around it. But this is merely one mask among many. It might appear as a massive black goat with curling horns and a voice like a man. It could manifest as an enormous rabbit bounding across your path, or a monstrous dog with matted fur and teeth like daggers. In some accounts, it takes on human form, a dark, handsome stranger offering assistance on a lonely road, only to reveal its true nature when it's far too late to flee. The creature's primary sport, its most famous trick, is the midnight ride. It approaches a solitary traveller, often someone walking home late from a fair or a gathering, and presents itself as a beautiful, docile horse. The exhausted traveller, seeing an opportunity to rest their weary legs, climbs onto its back. The moment they are seated, the transformation occurs. The horse's eyes ignite with malevolent fire, and it launches into a wild, uncontrolled gallop through the darkness. It leaps over hedges and stone walls, plunges through rivers and bogs, and races across the countryside at terrifying speed with the rider clinging desperately to its mane, unable to dismount, unable to do anything but hold on and pray for dawn. Some victims are deposited at their doorsteps at sunrise, battered, bruised, and half mad with terror but alive. Others are found miles from home, dumped in a ditch or a muddy field, their clothes torn, and their minds broken by the ordeal. And some, the truly unfortunate ones, are never seen again, carried away to the other world or drowned in some lonely bog, their fate a mystery that will never be solved. The Púca's temperament is as changeable as its form. Unlike the consistently malevolent spirits of other traditions, the Púca operates by its own incomprehensible logic. On some nights it might be content to merely startle travellers with strange noises or phantom lights. On others it becomes genuinely dangerous, a predator that seems to delight in human suffering. There are even rare accounts of the Púca offering genuine help, leading a lost traveller to safety or warning a farmer of impending disaster, only to return to its trickster ways the very next night. One universal constant in the folklore is the creature's deep connection to specific times and places. The Púca is most active during the autumn, particularly around Samhain, when the boundaries between worlds grow thin. After the harvest is complete, after November 1st, any crops left in the field are considered to belong to the Púca. To harvest them is to risk its wrath. Berries that remain on the bush after Samhain are said to be spoiled by the creature's touch, poisoned or cursed, unfit for human consumption. Certain locations become known as the Púca's territory. A particular crossroads, a specific bridge, a lonely stretch of bog road. The wise traveller learns these places and avoids them after dark, takes the long way around, accepts the extra mile as the price of safety. To ignore these warnings, to walk boldly into the Púca's domain out of skepticism or bravado, is to invite disaster. The Púca represents something essential about the Celtic understanding of the natural world. Nature is not benign. It is not inherently hostile either. It is wild, unpredictable, and fundamentally indifferent to human wishes and human safety. The Púca embodies this truth. It is the sudden storm that destroys a harvest. It is the treacherous ground that swallows the unwary. It is every danger that lurks in the darkness beyond the firelight, given form and consciousness and a dark, inscrutable will. We turn now from tricksters and seasonal spirits to a being of far greater and more terrible power. She is older than the mountains, more enduring than stone, and her name is spoken with reverence and dread in equal measure. She is the Morrígan, the phantom queen, the sovereign goddess of war, fate, and death. She is not a monster or a simple ghost, but a divine power, one of the most complex and formidable figures in all of Irish mythology. Her very nature is multiplicity. Sometimes she appears as a single goddess, but more often she manifests as a trinity. Three sisters who share a name and a purpose. Bad Bee, the battle crow, who flies shrieking over the carnage of war. Macha, the sovereign and the curse-bringer, who ensures that oaths are kept and violations punished, and Nemain, frenzy itself, whose presence on the battlefield inspires such terror that warriors drop their weapons and flee in madness. Together and separately, they are the Morrígan, and they preside over the intersection of death, sovereignty, and destiny. She is most famous for her role in the great epic Tain Bo Cuailnge, the cattle raid of Cailleach, where she encounters the legendary hero Cuchulainn. Their relationship is one of the most complex in all of Celtic myth. She appears to him first as a beautiful young woman, offering him her love and her assistance in battle. But Cuchulainn, proud and focused only on his duty, rejects her. A goddess scorned is a dangerous thing. The Morrígan does not rage or weep. Instead, she promises that she will oppose him in his greatest battle, and she keeps her word. When Cuchulainn next faces his enemies, she comes to him in three terrible forms. First, as an eel that winds around his legs in the river ford, trying to trip him and drown him. He breaks her back with a precise blow. Next, as a wolf that stampedes a herd of cattle toward him, threatening to trample him. He puts out her eye with a stone from his sling. Finally, as a red-eared white heifer leading the stampede, and he breaks her leg with another perfect cast. Each time he wounds her, and each time she retreats. But her point is made. She is a power that cannot be dismissed, cannot be insulted without consequence. Later, she appears to him as an old woman milking a cow, bearing the exact wounds he inflicted. She offers him milk, and with each drink he takes, he blesses her. With each blessing, one of her wounds heals. It is a masterful piece of mythological storytelling. Cuchulainn, bound by the sacred laws of hospitality and courtesy, heals the very goddess he has wounded, and in doing so acknowledges her power over him. The Morrigan's most iconic form is that of the crow or raven, the scald crow, the hooded one that perches on the corpses of the slain and feasts on the battlefield dead. This is not mere scavenging. It is a sacred function. She is the one who claims the souls of warriors, who decides who lives and who dies, who carries the fallen to whatever lies beyond. Her presence on the battlefield is a promise and a prophecy. Where she lands, death will follow. But she is more than death. She is also sovereignty itself, the spiritual embodiment of the land. In several tales, she appears to kings and heroes as a test. She might manifest as a hideous hag who demands to be kissed or embraced, and only the one with the courage and wisdom to see past appearances, to honour her despite her frightening form, is rewarded. When kissed by the worthy, she transforms into a radiant queen, and in that transformation, she grants the hero rightful kingship over the land. Sovereignty is not taken by force alone. It must be recognized, acknowledged, and honored. In the mythic cycle, she plays a crucial role in the great battle of Mag Tuired, appearing to the Dagda, the good god, of the Tuatha De Danann at Samhain. She stands astride a river, washing the bloodied armour of those destined to fall in the coming war, a vision of prophecy and doom. But she is not passive. She joins the battle herself, using her magic to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy, tipping the scales toward victory for her chosen people. The Morrigan is the goddess who reminds us that death is not the enemy of life, but its necessary companion. She is the harvester who ensures that the cycle continues, that the old dies, so the new can be born. She is fate, but not cruel fate, simply inevitable fate. She teaches that sovereignty is earned through wisdom and courage, that power must be acknowledged even when it comes in unexpected forms, and that the greatest strength lies not in denying death, but in facing it with eyes wide open. From the grand scale of gods and battles, we draw close now to something more intimate, more personal, and in its own way more terrifying. This is a phenomenon not of monsters or spirits, but of the self-reflected, of the boundary between life and death made visible. Across Ireland and Scotland, people spoke in hushed tones of the fetch, the spectral double that appears as an omen of approaching death. The experience is always deeply unsettling. You are walking alone at twilight or sitting quietly in your home when you see a figure in the distance or just at the edge of your vision. As it draws closer or as you focus on it, a sick recognition sets in. The figure is dressed exactly as you are. It moves with your gait, and when it turns to look at you, you see your own face staring back, pale and expressionless, from eyes that do not quite seem alive. This is your fetch, your spiritual double, and folklore is clear about what its appearance means. If you see your fetch in the evening or at night, it is a warning that your death will come soon, within days, weeks, or perhaps a year, but inevitably it is approaching. If you see it in the morning, the meaning is slightly different, but no less grim. Someone close to you, someone you love, will soon die, and your double has come to prepare you for the grief that awaits. The fetch is not malicious. It does not cause the death it foretells. It is simply a messenger from whatever power governs fate, a supernatural courtesy that allows the doomed a chance to put their affairs in order, to say farewells, to make peace with the inevitable. Some accounts describe the fetch as being translucent or slightly luminous, not quite solid, a thing of spirit rather than flesh. Others say it appears completely real until you attempt to touch it, at which point it vanishes like smoke, leaving behind only a cold spot in the air and an unshakable feeling of dread. There are darker variations. In some tellings, the fetch can be summoned deliberately by those with the sight, the second vision that allows them to perceive the spiritual world. These seers might look at a gathering and see doubles standing behind certain individuals, silent phantoms that only they can perceive, marking out those who will not survive the year. It is a terrible gift to know and to be unable to warn, to watch death's shadow fall across the faces of friends and neighbours. The concept of the fetch connects to a broader Celtic belief in the existence of the spirit body separate from the physical form. The idea that each person possesses not just a soul, but a kind of spiritual duplicate that can, under certain circumstances, manifest independently. When a person is near death, when the connection between body and spirit begins to loosen, that duplicate can slip free and appear in the world, a ghost before the actual death occurs. The fetch serves a crucial function in folklore. It transforms the abstract terror of death into something visible, something that can be recognized and therefore, in some small way, prepared for. It acknowledges the universal human fear of sudden death, of dying unprepared, of leaving things unsaid and undone. The fetch offers a warning, a moment of clarity, a chance to face the end with dignity rather than surprise. We venture now into one of the darkest corners of Irish legend, to a tale that predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by centuries and yet contains all the essential elements of the vampire myth. This is the story of Abhartach, the undead tyrant, a creature of pure malevolence whose reign of terror over his people did not end with his death, but merely transformed into something far worse. The tale, recorded in detail by the 19th century scholar Patrick Weston Joyce and drawn from earlier Gaelic sources, takes place in the ancient kingdom of Derry. Abhartach was a chieftain, but he was no ordinary ruler. He was a dwarf, small in stature but enormous in cruelty. He practiced dark magic, dwelt in the old pagan ways, and ruled his people with sadistic tyranny. He demanded impossible tributes, inflicted arbitrary punishments, and inspired such hatred and fear that his subjects finally conspired with a neighbouring chieftain to have him murdered. The assassination was carried out. Abhartach was killed, stabbed through the heart, and buried in a grave standing upright according to the custom for chieftains of his rank. His people rejoiced, believing their nightmare had ended. But they rejoiced too soon. The next evening, as darkness fell, a figure emerged from the burial mound. It was Abhartach, returned from the grave, his skin pale as death, his eyes burning with unholy hunger. He went immediately to the homes of his former subjects and demanded tribute of a new and horrifying kind. He required each household to open the veins of their arms and fill a bowl with their blood, which he would then drink to sustain his undead existence. Refusal meant immediate death for the entire family. The people were plunged into despair. They begged the neighbouring chieftain to kill Abhartach again, and again he did so, running him through with a sword. Again the tyrant was buried, and again the next evening he rose from his grave to continue his vampiric demands. This cycle repeated itself until finally, in desperation, the chieftain consulted a Christian saint, a druid in some versions of the tale, seeking knowledge of how to end the terror permanently. The holy man revealed the truth. Abhartach was no longer a mere man. He had become one of the nymph Maeb, the undead, and ordinary weapons could not keep him in his grave. To bind him forever required a very specific ritual. First, the chieftain must kill Abhartach using a sword made of yew wood, a tree sacred in Celtic tradition and associated with death and the otherworld. Second, the body must be buried upside down to prevent it from rising. Third, the grave must be surrounded by thorns. And finally, a great stone must be placed upon the burial site, sealing the evil beneath. The chieftain followed these instructions precisely. He forged a blade of yew, hunted down the vampire, and struck him down. He buried the corpse upside down in a pit ringed with thorns, and over it he placed a massive standing stone. To this day, in the townland of Sluagh in County Derry, there stands a large stone known locally as Abhartach's tomb. The ground around it, despite centuries of farming, is said to refuse to settle, to remain disturbed, as if something beneath still struggles against its prison. The legend of Abhartach is remarkable for its specificity and its antiquity. It contains nearly every element we associate with vampire folklore: the undead creature that drinks blood, the inability of normal weapons to kill it, the need for ritual burial, the protective power of sacred wood and holy intervention. Some scholars have argued that Stoker, who had deep connections to Ireland and was a collector of folklore, may have been influenced by this very tale when crafting his famous count. But Abhartach is more than just a proto-vampire. He is a cautionary tale about tyranny, about the evil that men do living on long after they themselves are gone. He represents the fear that some wrongs cannot be righted, that some evils are so profound they corrupt even death itself, and that the sins of the past can rise up to haunt the present if they are not properly laid to rest. Not all the beings of Celtic mythology are agents of terror or doom. Some hold different kinds of power, the power of wisdom, of transformation, of the profound knowledge that lies at the heart of existence. In the rivers of Ireland swims one such being, and its story is one of the most beautiful and enduring in the entire mythological tradition. This is the tale of the Salmon of Knowledge, and of the poet Finegas and his student, the young Fionn mac Cumhail. The story begins with the salmon itself, no ordinary fish, but a creature of deep magic. It dwelt in a sacred pool beneath the hazels of wisdom, the Tobar Segais, a well at the source of all knowledge. These 9 hazel trees grew at the world's centre, producing nuts that contained all the wisdom of the universe. When the nuts ripened and fell into the water, they were eaten by the salmon, and with each nut consumed, the fish absorbed another layer of cosmic understanding until it contained within itself all knowledge, past, present, and future, the secrets of poetry, magic, and the hidden truth of all things. Many sought this salmon, for it was said that whoever ate of its flesh would gain all its accumulated wisdom in a single transformative moment. The poet Finegas had spent 7 long years camped by the River Boyne, fishing patiently, waiting for the prophesied day when he would finally catch the legendary fish and consume it, thereby becoming the wisest man in all of Ireland. Then one day, when hope had begun to fade, his line went taut with a weight like no other. After a tremendous struggle, he pulled from the silver water a salmon of extraordinary size and beauty, shimmering with an otherworldly light. This was it. This was the Salmon of Knowledge. Finegas knew he must prepare the fish with ritual care. He built a fire and instructed his young apprentice, Fionn, with absolute clarity. Cook this fish, but you must not, under any circumstances, taste even the smallest morsel of it. Bring it to me whole and untasted, and I will share its wisdom with you afterward. Fionn, dutiful and obedient, set about his task. He placed the salmon over the fire and watched it carefully as it cooked, turning it at intervals to ensure even heat. But as he worked, hot fat spat from the skin and landed on his thumb, burning him. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct, Fionn put his burned thumb into his mouth to ease the pain. In that instant, everything changed. The knowledge contained in the salmon flooded into him, not through his stomach, but through that tiny taste, that drop of the fish's essence absorbed through the burn. When Finegas returned and looked at his student, he saw immediately what had happened. Fionn's eyes had changed. They held depths that had not been there before, a light of understanding that marked him as transformed. "You have tasted it," Finegas said, and it was not an accusation, but a statement of fact, tinged with resignation and perhaps a strange kind of acceptance. Fionn could not lie. He told his master what had occurred, expecting punishment or rage. But Finegas was a true poet and a wise man. He understood that prophecy had been fulfilled, though not in the way he had imagined. The salmon was meant for Fionn, not for him. Destiny had its own designs. "Eat the rest of it then," Finegas told him. "The wisdom was never meant to be mine." And so Fionn consumed the Salmon of Knowledge, and from that day forward he possessed extraordinary insight. Whenever he needed to access the deep wisdom or to see hidden truths, he needed only to bite his thumb, to touch it to his lips, and the knowledge would flow into him. This gift guided him throughout his life, making him the greatest leader of the Fianna, the legendary warrior band of Irish mythology, and one of the wisest heroes in all the tales. The story of the Salmon of Knowledge is layered with meaning. It speaks to the Celtic reverence for poetry and learning, placing the pursuit of wisdom above mere martial prowess. It acknowledges that knowledge often comes through unexpected means, through accident and grace rather than lengthy planning. It teaches that destiny cannot be forced or circumvented, that what is meant to be will find its way to fulfillment regardless of human schemes. And it reminds us that wisdom, once gained, is not a static possession, but a living thing that must be called upon, accessed consciously, used with care and intention. Fionn biting his thumb becomes a symbol of the poet pausing before speaking, the leader reflecting before acting, the seeker of truth turning inward before pronouncing judgment. True wisdom is not the accumulation of facts, but the deep understanding of how and when to apply what one knows. Among all the tales of transformation and tragedy in Celtic mythology, few are as heartbreaking and enduring as the story of the Children of Lir. It is one of the three sorrows of Irish storytelling, a tale that has been told and retold for over 1,000 years, and it has lost none of its power to move those who hear it. This is a story of jealousy, dark magic, and a curse so terrible it spans centuries, but also of love that endures beyond all understanding, and the ultimate redemption that comes through suffering. The tale begins with Lir, a chieftain of the Tuatha De Danann, a widower mourning his beloved wife. To ease his sorrow and to provide a mother for his 4 children, he marries Aoife, the sister of his dead wife. At first, she seems a loving stepmother, but as time passes, jealousy takes root in her heart. She sees how deeply Lir loves his children, Fionnuala, the eldest daughter, and her 3 brothers, Aod, Fiachra, and Con, and she begins to resent the attention they receive, feeling herself displaced and unloved. Jealousy curdles into hatred, and hatred seeks release. One day, Aoife takes the children to a remote lake, Loch Abhartach. While they swim and play in the water, innocent and trusting, she raises her druid wand and speaks a curse of such cruelty it echoes through the ages. In an instant, the 4 children are transformed. Their human bodies dissolve, replaced by the forms of swans, beautiful white swans, with voices that retain the power of human speech and song. Aoife pronounces their doom. They will remain in this form for 900 years, spending 300 years on Loch Abhartach, 300 years on the Sea of Moyle between Ireland and Scotland, and 300 years on the waters of Inish Glora off the coast of Mayo. Only when a king from the north marries a queen from the south, and only when they hear the sound of a Christian bell will the spell be broken. Realizing too late the enormity of her crime, Aoife is herself punished, transformed by her father into a demon of the air, condemned to wander in agony for eternity. But this justice does nothing to ease the suffering of the children. For 300 years the Swan children live on the peaceful lake, and their father and the people of the Tuatha De Danann visit them often, gathering to hear them sing. Their voices are achingly beautiful, filled with such sorrow and sweetness that all who hear them are moved to tears. The swans sing of lost childhood, of the joy of being human, of the warmth of their father's embrace, and all who listen feel their own hearts break. But time, merciless time, moves forward. The Tuatha De Danann fade from the world, retreating into the hollow hills. Lir dies, and the Swan children are left alone. Their 300 years on Loch Abhartach end, and they must fly to the Sea of Moil, a cold, storm-tossed strait where no comfort exists. Here they endure freezing gales, crashing waves, and utter isolation, singing their songs to the wind and the indifferent sea. 300 more years pass in suffering. Then they fly to Inish Glora to spend their final centuries in exile, their voices growing weaker, their hearts heavy with the weight of time. Everything they knew is gone. The world has changed beyond recognition. The old gods have vanished, new people walk the land, and the Swan children are forgotten relics of an age that has passed into legend. Finally, as the 9th century draws to a close, a Christian hermit named Mocha Omhog arrives at Inish Glora and builds a small chapel. When he rings the chapel bell for the first time, its sound echoes across the water, and the curse begins to break. At the same moment, a marriage occurs between a northern king and a southern queen, fulfilling the second condition. The spell shatters. The swans transform, but 900 years have passed, and the forms they return to are not the young bodies they lost. They become ancient, withered, impossibly old, their true ages finally catching up with them. Mocha Omhog baptizes them in their final moments, and one by one, they die, their souls finally free to rest. The Children of Lir speaks to universal human fears and sorrows. It is about the cruelty of jealousy and the terrible consequences of unchecked emotion. It is about endurance, about surviving unimaginable suffering with grace and dignity. It is about the bonds between siblings, love that persists across centuries of separation and pain. And it is about the transformation of the world, the passing of the old ways and the coming of the new, the bittersweet understanding that all things, even gods and magic, must eventually fade. The image of the 4 swans singing on the dark water has become one of the most powerful and enduring in all of Irish culture, a symbol of beauty born from sorrow, of voices that refuse to be silenced, even by the cruel curse. We turn our gaze now to the darkening sky, to a phenomenon that filled the hearts of the Celtic people with a dread so profound that it shaped their customs around death itself. When the wind rises suddenly on a still night, when clouds race across the moon and strange cries echo from above, the old people would shutter their windows and bolt their doors. They knew what travelled on that wind. They called it the Sluagh, the host of the unforgiven, and it was among the most terrifying of all supernatural phenomena. The Sluagh were not ghosts in any conventional sense. They were the damned, the souls of sinners so wicked that heaven had rejected them, but whose crimes were so bound to the mortal world that hell could not contain them either. The earth itself would not grant them rest. They were condemned to wander the skies in an eternal, restless host, forever travelling, forever searching, forever hungry. They appeared as a vast dark cloud, or as a flock of blackbirds moving against the wind, their passage marked by a terrible rushing sound, and voices that seemed to scream and wail in languages both recognizable and utterly alien. Some described seeing the actual forms of the dead, twisted, agonized human shapes caught in an endless spiral of flight, their faces contorted with rage and despair, their hands reaching out as if grasping for something forever beyond their reach. The Sluagh were most active during the liminal times, those moments when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. At dusk and dawn during the quarter days, and especially at Samhain, their power was at its peak. They travelled always from the west, the direction associated with death and the setting sun, and this directional specificity gave rise to one of the most widespread customs in Scottish and Irish death rites. When a person lay dying, it was absolutely essential that all west-facing windows and doors be closed and covered. The family would drape cloth over these openings, stuff gaps with rags, do anything to prevent even the smallest western opening from remaining accessible. The reason was terrifying. The Sluagh would attempt to steal the departing soul, to claim it for their cursed host before it could pass on to its rightful rest. If even a single western window stood open, the host could sweep in, snatch the soul at the moment of death, and carry it away to join them in their eternal torment. But the Sluagh did not prey only on the dying. They posed a terrible threat to the living as well. Those who wandered alone at night, particularly in wild or remote places, risked being spotted by the host. The Sluagh were known to swoop down without warning, seize an unwary traveller, and carry them into the sky. Some victims were transported miles away, dropped bruised and terrified in unfamiliar territory with no memory of their journey save fragmented nightmares. Others were never seen again, presumably absorbed into the host itself, their own souls corrupted and damned by the experience. In some accounts, the Sluagh possessed a particularly vicious weapon, invisible arrows or elf shot that they would fire down at humans and livestock. These projectiles caused sudden, inexplicable illnesses, mysterious paralysis, or instant death. When a person or animal suddenly collapsed with no apparent cause, when sickness struck without warning, the Sluagh were often blamed. The concept served as a folk explanation for stroke, heart attack, and other sudden medical emergencies that seemed to come from nowhere. The host was also said to conscript the living into their service. They would hover over battlefields collecting the souls of those who died in particularly violent or sinful states. They would linger near executions waiting to claim the condemned. And they were believed to actively seek out the worst of humanity, murderers, oath-breakers, those who had committed unforgivable crimes, and mark them for eventual recruitment into the host. There was a deep moral dimension to the Sluagh legend. They served as a constant reminder that actions have consequences that extend beyond death. That evil does not simply disappear when the evildoer dies, but can corrupt the soul so thoroughly that even the grave offers no peace. They were a warning against sin, against cruelty, against abandoning the moral codes that held communities together. The Sluagh also represented communal trauma. In the Highlands of Scotland, particularly after the brutal suppression of the Jacobite risings and the Highland clearances, the image of a host of displaced, tormented souls wandering the sky took on additional resonance. They became a way of processing collective grief, of giving form to the souls of those who died violently, those who were driven from their homes, those whose bodies were never properly laid to rest. In the quiet glens and isolated cottages where belief in the Sluagh persisted longest, people developed protective rituals. Salt scattered across thresholds, iron nails driven into door frames, prayers spoken at dusk. These small acts of warding were not superstition but survival strategies, ways of claiming some small measure of control over forces that seemed overwhelming and malevolent. The Sluagh remind us that not all supernatural beings in Celtic folklore are approachable or understandable in human terms. They are not tricksters who can be outwitted or guardians who can be appeased. They are chaos given form, the dark side of the sky itself, an eternal warning written in the wind. From the terror of the damned host, we journey now to a place of beauty beyond imagining, but beauty that carries its own profound danger. This is the story of Oisin, the greatest poet of the Fianna, and his journey to Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. It is a tale of love and loss, of the seductive power of paradise, and of the terrible price of forgetting one's true home. Oisin was the son of Fionn mac Cumhaill and the dear woman Sadb, a warrior poet of extraordinary skill and sensitivity. One day, while hunting with the Fianna along the shores of Loch Lean in Killarney, the warriors saw a figure approaching across the water. It was a woman of such breathtaking beauty that she seemed to illuminate the morning itself. She rode a white horse whose hooves moved across the surface of the lake as if it were solid ground, creating no ripple, leaving no wake. Her name was Niamh Chin Oir, Niamh of the golden hair, and she was a princess of Tir na Nog, the otherworldly realm where age, sickness and death had no dominion. She had come to the mortal world for a single purpose, to find Oisin. She had heard tales of his poetry, of his courage, of his gentle heart, and she had fallen in love with the idea of him before ever seeing his face. She spoke to him directly, ignoring all others. I have travelled far to find you, Oisin, son of Fionn. Come with me to Tir na Nog. In my father's land you will never know sorrow or pain. You will remain young and strong forever. We will live in a crystal palace where music plays without musicians, where feasts appear without cooks, where every desire is fulfilled before it is even spoken. Oisin looked at his father, at his companions, at the green hills of Ireland that he loved. But Niamh's beauty was otherworldly, and her promise irresistible. He made his choice. He climbed onto the white horse behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and together they rode out across the water, moving faster and faster until the shores of Ireland disappeared behind them, and they passed through a veil of mist into another world entirely. Tir na Nog was everything Neve had promised and more. It was a land of perpetual spring, where flowers never faded and fruit never fell from the trees. Oisin lived in wonder and joy, married Neve, and together they had children. Time seemed irrelevant, merely a succession of perfect days. He thought he had been there for 3 years, perhaps 4. But eventually, as it does for all mortals, homesickness began to gnaw at him. He missed his father. He missed his comrades. He missed the rough, imperfect, beautiful world of Ireland. He asked Neve if he might return, just for a brief visit, just to see his homeland one more time. Neve's face grew grave. She tried to dissuade him, but seeing his determination, she agreed on one absolute condition. "You may take my white horse and return to Ireland," she said, "but you must never, under any circumstances, dismount. You must not let your feet touch the ground. If you do, you will never be able to return to me, and the years you have spent here will claim you all at once." Oisin promised. He climbed onto the white horse and rode back across the sea, through the mist, until the shores of Ireland rose before him. But the island he found was not the island he had left. The landscape was familiar, but everything else was wrong. The great fortress of the Fianna stood in ruins, overgrown with weeds. The people were smaller, stranger, dressed in unfamiliar clothes. He rode to where his father's hall had stood and found only a grass-covered mound. He stopped a group of men working in a field and asked them about Fionn and the Fianna. They looked at him with confusion. "Those are old stories," one said. "The Fianna died out 300 years ago. They're nothing but legends now." 300 years. His 3 years in paradise had been 3 centuries in the mortal world. Everyone he had known was dust. His father, his friends, his entire way of life had passed into myth. Heartbroken, disoriented, Oisin wandered the changed landscape. He came upon a group of men struggling to move a large stone. In his time, any warrior of the Fianna could have lifted it easily. These men seemed weak to him, diminished. Forgetting Neve's warning in his grief and frustration, he leaned down from his horse to help them. The saddle girth broke. Oisin tumbled to the ground. His feet touched the earth of Ireland. In an instant, 300 years of aging crashed over him like a wave. His young, strong body withered and collapsed. His golden hair turned white and fell away. His smooth skin became wrinkled and spotted. He became a blind, feeble old man, ancient beyond measure, lying broken on the ground he had been warned never to touch. The men, terrified, called for help. A Christian monk named Patrick came and, recognizing something of the old world in this mysterious ancient, took him in. In his final days, Oisin and Patrick engaged in a famous dialogue, the old poet of the pagan world conversing with the new voice of Christianity. Oisin told his stories, sang his songs, shared the wisdom of the Fianna, ensuring that at least their memory would survive, even if they themselves were gone. Then he died, the last living link to a world that had vanished. The tale of Oisin in Tir na Nog resonates across centuries because it speaks to universal human experiences. It is about the seduction of escape, the fantasy of a life without consequence or pain. It is about the immigrant experience, the feeling of returning home, to find that home no longer exists in the form you remember. It is about the relentless passage of time and the impossible desire to step outside of it. Most profoundly, it is about the danger of paradise itself. Tir na Nog offers eternal youth and joy, but the price is disconnection from everything that makes us human, change, growth, even sorrow and loss. Oisin's tragedy is that he tries to have both worlds and loses everything. The moment his foot touches Irish soil, he is confronted with the truth that we cannot stop time, cannot preserve what we love in amber, cannot return to the past without paying a terrible price. We descend now from the realm of gods and epic heroes to the most intimate and heartbreaking fear of the Celtic household, the fear of losing a child to the faeries. The changeling legends found throughout Ireland, Scotland and Wales speak to the vulnerability of infants and the desperate attempts of parents to protect what they loved most in a world where childhood mortality was heartbreakingly common. The belief was specific and terrifying. The faeries, despite their otherworldly beauty and power, envied human children. They coveted mortal infants for their potential, their vitality, their connection to the physical world. And so, in the vulnerable days after birth, before a child was baptized and protected by the church, the faeries might strike. They would come in the night, silent as shadows, and steal the human baby from its cradle. In its place, they would leave a substitute, a changeling. This might be an elderly faerie, glamoured to appear as an infant placed among humans to live out its final years in comfort. Or it might be a piece of enchanted wood, a stock, given temporary life to deceive the parents until the faeries were safely away with their prize. The changeling would seem wrong from the start. It might look like the stolen child, but its behaviour would reveal its true nature. It would cry constantly with a strange, unsettling wail. It would refuse to grow or develop normally, remaining small and sickly. Its eyes would seem ancient, knowing, filled with a cunning that no infant should possess. It might eat voraciously, yet never gain weight, or refuse all food and waste away. Some accounts describe changelings with pointed teeth, or with an unnaturally hairy body, or with eyes of different colours. For parents who suspected they were raising a changeling, the folklore provided cruel and desperate tests. One common method was to brew beer in eggshells in sight of the creature. A normal child would show no reaction, but a changeling, caught off guard, might cry out in its ancient fairy voice, "I am old, old indeed, but I have never seen beer brewed in an eggshell." This revelation would confirm the worst fears. Other tests were more brutal. The suspected changeling might be left on a dunghill overnight, or placed in a cold stream, or held over a fire. The theory was that the faeries, unable to bear seeing their own kind suffer, would return and reclaim their substitute, giving back the human child in exchange. Whether this ever worked is unknown. What is certain is that some children died in these attempts to force an exchange. The changeling belief served multiple psychological and social functions. In an era of high infant mortality, when children died from disease, malnutrition, or conditions we now understand but could not treat then, parents needed explanations. To believe that a sickly, failing child was not truly your beloved son or daughter but an impostor might make the inevitable loss slightly more bearable. The real child was not dying. The real child was alive and well, just elsewhere, in the fairy realm. The changeling legend also provided an explanation for children born with disabilities or developmental differences. A child who did not develop speech, who showed signs of what we might now recognize as autism or Down syndrome, who had physical deformities. These children were sometimes identified as changelings. This belief could lead to terrible abuse, but it could also, paradoxically, lead to care. Some families treated the changeling well out of hope that kindness would encourage the fairies to return the true child. Protection against fairy theft was a constant concern. New mothers and unbaptized infants were considered especially vulnerable. Iron, the metal most antithetical to fairy magic, was placed in cradles and around doorways. Rowan wood, sacred and protective, was hung above the infant's bed. Salt might be sprinkled in the cradle. A father's coat laid across the child offered protection. Continuous vigilance was maintained. A baby should never be left entirely alone until after baptism had placed it under divine protection. Certain times were more dangerous than others. The quarter days, especially May Eve and November Eve, when fairy activity peaked, required extra precautions. Dusk and dawn, those liminal hours, were risky times to have an infant near open doors or windows. In some rare tales, the changeling itself was not malevolent but pitiable. These stories tell of fairy children who never wanted to be left among humans, who suffered from the separation from their own kind. A few folk tales end with the changeling being treated with such kindness that the fairies, impressed by human compassion, return the stolen child out of gratitude rather than coercion. The changeling legends ultimately reflect the precarious nature of life for our ancestors. They lived in a world where children died with terrible frequency, where disabilities occurred without explanation, where the joy of a new birth was always shadowed by the knowledge of how fragile that life was. The fairies became a way to process these tragedies, to maintain hope in the face of loss, and to exercise some sense of control through ritual and protection, even when that control was largely illusory. We return now to a figure already familiar from the opening of our journey, but there is more to learn about the Dullahan, more layers to this most terrifying of death's servants. Beyond the basic terror of the headless rider, there exists a complex web of folklore that reveals the Dullahan as something far more than a simple monster. The Dullahan's connection to sovereignty and ancient sacrifice runs deep. Some scholars trace the figure back to the pre-Christian god Crom Dubh, a dark deity associated with harvest and death, to whom sacrifices, possibly human, were once offered. In this interpretation, the Dullahan is not merely a death omen, but a sacred executioner, the one who comes to claim those whose deaths are somehow necessary to maintain cosmic balance. The coach he sometimes drives, the Coister Bodhar, has its own terrible folklore. It is not merely a vehicle, but a supernatural conveyance with specific rules. The coach is entirely silent. Even its wheels make no sound as they roll over stone or earth. But when it stops, the silence becomes absolute, oppressive, a supernatural hush that falls over the entire area. Dogs cease barking, insects stop chirping, even the wind seems to hold its breath. When the Dullahan opens the door of his coach, he speaks a single name, that person, Wherever they are at that moment dies instantly. Their soul is pulled from their body and drawn to the coach, and the Dullahan drives away with his passenger to whatever lies beyond. But here is where the law becomes more complex. The Dullahan does not simply kill at random. He is bound by certain cosmic rules. He comes only for those whose time has come, whose thread has been measured and cut by fate itself. He is not murder, but death personified, the inevitable made manifest. This distinction mattered greatly in folk belief. The Dullahan could not be bargained with or bribed or begged for mercy, because he was not acting from malice, but from cosmic necessity. There are gradations in his appearance that carry meaning. Sometimes he appears as a lone rider on a black horse. This is the form he takes when claiming a single soul, a person of no particular importance in the great scheme of things. When he drives the coach, it signals a more significant death. A person of influence, a leader, someone whose passing will create ripples in the community. In the rarest accounts, he is said to appear with an entire spectral entourage, a funeral procession of phantom mourners. This form is reserved for the deaths of kings, chieftains, or those whose passing marks the end of an era. The procession includes keening women, pipers playing laments, and torchbearers with flames that give no heat and shed a cold, greenish light. The Dullahan's sensitivity to gold has spawned its own subset of legend. While a single gold pin can drive him away, the law specifies that the gold must be pure and must be displayed openly, held up with deliberate intent. A gold ring hidden in a pocket offers no protection. The gold must catch the light, must shine, must be a visible challenge to the darkness he represents. This has led to a folk practice in certain parts of Ireland where travellers on lonely roads at night would carry a gold coin, not in their purse, but in their hand, ready to hold it up at the first sign of supernatural danger. Some accounts tell of people who escaped the Dullahan by flinging a gold object directly at him, a coin, a ring, a clasp from a cloak. The instant the gold touches him, he vanishes with a terrible scream of rage and frustration. There is also the question of whether the Dullahan possesses any kind of consciousness, or if he is merely a force, an automaton of death. Most accounts suggest the former. His anger when thwarted by gold, his selective targeting, his varying appearances based on the significance of the death, all suggest a being with awareness and intention, even if that intention is not free will, but rather the execution of a preordained cosmic function. In modern Irish folklore, the Dullahan has become conflated with the Banshee in some regions, the two death omens blurring together. But traditional lore keeps them distinct. The Banshee announces, the Dullahan claims. The Banshee mourns, the Dullahan executes. Where the Banshee represents the community's grief, the Dullahan represents death's absolute authority. As our journey through the otherworld draws to a close, we stand at the threshold between past and present, between the world that believed in these beings as literal truth and the world that understands them as folklore and metaphor. But that threshold is not as clear as we might think. These creatures, the Cailleach shaping the mountains, the Púca haunting the crossroads, the Morrígan choosing who lives and dies, the tragic Oisin returning to a world that has forgotten him, the parents terrified of changelings, the travellers fleeing the Dullahan, they are not dead. They have not vanished, they have merely transformed, as all things in Celtic mythology transform. They live in the landscape itself. Walk through the highlands, and you feel the presence of the Cailleach in the bitter wind. Stand on a lonely Irish crossroad at dusk, and the Púca seems suddenly very real. Every white swan carries an echo of the Children of Lir. Every raven might be the Morrígan, watching, judging, waiting. They live in our psychology. The changeling legend speaks to our modern anxieties about identity and belonging. The fetch represents our confrontation with mortality. The salmon of knowledge embodies our hunger for meaning and understanding. Oisin's tragedy resonates with anyone who has felt disconnected from their own history, their own roots. They live in our stories. Contemporary fantasy literature, films and games draw constantly from this well. The creatures change their names, adapt to new contexts, but their essential nature remains. They are too powerful, too archetypal, too fundamentally connected to the human experience to ever truly disappear, and they live in the practice of storytelling itself. Every time someone tells a ghost story, warns a child about dangers, uses a legend to explain a landscape feature or a historical event, the tradition continues. The specific belief in faeries stealing children may have faded, but the practice of using narrative to process fear, to teach caution, to bind communities together, that endures. The Celtic Otherworld was never a single place but a way of seeing the world. It was the understanding that reality has layers, that the material and the spiritual interpenetrate, that mystery persists no matter how much we think we know. The mist that rises from a bog is just water vapour, but it is also a curtain between worlds. The standing stone is just rock shaped by ancient hands, but it is also a doorway, a marker, a link to the sacred. In our modern age of science and certainty, there is something profoundly valuable in maintaining a relationship with these old stories and the beings they contain. They remind us that our ancestors were not simple or superstitious, but deeply thoughtful people who used narrative to encode complex truths about human existence. They remind us that the world is stranger and more wonderful than our daily routines suggest. They remind us that we are part of a story that stretches back thousands of years, and will continue long after we are gone. The creatures of Celtic folklore teach us to respect forces larger than ourselves. Whether we interpret those forces as literal spirits or as representations of nature, fate, and the unconscious mind. They teach us that actions have consequences that ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. They teach us that boundaries matter, that some thresholds should not be crossed, that wisdom lies in recognizing the limits of human power and knowledge. Most importantly, they teach us that the world is still enchanted if we have eyes to see it. The veil between worlds has not closed. It has merely become invisible to those who have forgotten how to look. But in the twilight hours, in the wild places, in the moments when rational explanation fails and wonder breaks through, there it is. There they are. The beings of the other world, waiting patiently for us to remember, to acknowledge, to recognize that we share this world with forces and presences that were old when our great-grandparents were young, and will endure long after our great-grandchildren have passed into legend themselves. Thank you for walking with me through these shadowed paths, for listening to these ancient voices, for keeping the tradition alive through the simple act of attention. The stories continue. The other world persists. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of sight, the Cailleach walks across her mountains, the Púca waits at the crossroads, and the Morrígan watches over it all, eternal and patient, knowing that humanity's relationship with mystery and magic is not a relic of the past, but an ongoing conversation that will never truly end. If you have enjoyed this journey into the heart of Celtic mythology, please consider sharing these stories with others. And if your own heritage holds similar tales of wonder and terror, of gods and monsters, I would be honored to explore those traditions in future journeys. Until then, may your path be clear, your threshold secure, and may you always remember to leave cream by the hearth for those who guard your home while you sleep.